So
okay. I'm recording the session now as well.
Okie dokie.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Liza. Nice to see you.
You too. How you doing?
Good. Thank you. Great. Okay. Thank you everyone for coming. So I think we all kind of know each other, but there's definitely people from like 3 different cohorts at least overlapping, which is really nice. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know anyone, or maybe just a couple of us, I'm Clara. I graduated last year, but I did part-time, so I was in 2 cohorts. And then Kim and Oumou were both in my first year with me, but it was actually Kim's second year. So yeah, we're overlapping a lot with the years. Yeah, today we're just gonna like talk a little bit about podcasting, and Kim and Oumou have both been given money from someone to produce a podcast about their research. So that's why they both are here to talk about that today. And I've just sort of like, Oumou and I did a podcast for a couple of years, and Liza was also involved with that for a little bit. So yeah, I've got a little bit of podcasting experience. Yeah, so first we're just going to all sort of like say a little bit about our podcast backgrounds, and then we're just going to basically open it up and everyone can ask any questions, and that can all be really informal. So yeah, I'm just going to say a little bit about how I got into podcasting, and then I'm going to give it over to the other 2. So basically when I started LSE, I was sort of like thinking that I would really like to do a podcast, and I sort of told everyone, and everyone was like, let's do it. And then in the end, everyone got a bit shy, and then Liza actually offered to do it with me, but then she couldn't make it after all. And then Oumou offered to help, and then Oumou and I ended up co-hosting 2 seasons of a podcast where we just like interviewed a bunch of people. Where the first season was more like research based, where we like tried to like talk to people about their research and make that sort of like conversational and accessible. And the second season was more like activism based, where we like spoke to different activists from different countries and stuff about their experiences. And that was just a really, really great experience. And I just love about podcasting that it's such a really accessible and low-key way to sort of like take knowledge and make it like widely accessible and really understandable. So yeah, that's sort of like my background and my perspectives on podcasting. And now, Kim, I'm just going to give it over to you. Maybe you can just introduce yourself and talk about your podcast and your project a little bit.
So I'm Kim Nguyen, and I was part of the MSc Gender. I joined in 2017 and then graduated in 2019. Yeah, so like Clara, I also did the part-time, and I did MSc Gender rather than like the other streams, but I did take media courses. So I took GI 403, which is gender and representation, and I took GI 410, which is screening the present, contemporary film and cultural critique, and that was both taught by Sadie Waring. And so at the end, what I did for my dissertation, it's titled Melancholic, Disoriented and Haunted, Racial Histories and Ethnic Storytelling. And what it does is explores the intricate relationship between histories that hurt and representation through the media and literature. I do this through thinking about psychoanalysis, affect theory, and phenomenology, along with critical race theory. So in the process of researching for and writing about this dissertation, it led me to like contemplate becoming like a bit more knowledgeable on like current mental health care practice and how it currently and maybe could be better at attending to racial trauma. So I'm now training to be a psychodynamic psychotherapist, which means being a therapist using a psychoanalytic lens. And I also currently work in mental health care and suicide prevention. Alongside this, what I'm trying to do is share what I'm learning with the world and attempting to develop a more accessible way and maybe language around these very complicated but emotionally insightful conversations. And this is through producing a podcast. So last summer, I was invited to apply for something called an incubator grant. And this was by a media production company named 555 Films. To secure the grant, what I needed to do was come up with a podcasting project and explain the intended purpose of it and why it was important to share with the world. Then me and a few others were successful, and we became a group of grant winners. And we all received support from a development executive, an audio production manager, and and they have like years of experience of working as creatives and as part of the industry, but also as women, and they talk about that quite a lot. And the kind of like challenges and struggles of like just kind of being dismissed, undermined, dealing with like, I don't know, like a lot of like ego energy. So they're my mentors, and they help me both with creating content, with the content development, that side, but also the technical side. And so they help me kind of like make it become what they refer to it as broadcasting standards. And these are obviously like huge positives, especially for someone like me, because I have zero experience in media production. I'm more of a reader, a thinker, and like less so of a speaker and a producer. So I did need that kind of like hand holding. So those are the like really notable kind of like positives, but there's also notable cons as well. For example, like it's taking a really long time to produce. I won the grant back in August last year, so yeah, and the pilot is like nowhere near like kind of ready to be birthed. It's quite a long production development process, which kind of leads me to thinking about like there's that aspect when you do podcasting through a company, it's sometimes there's too many cooks at the same time. You've got different minds kind of blending together, and I'm working with people who have no experience in the ethics of sharing mental health knowledge, but also the social, cultural, and political knowledge too. Like, I'm working with people who haven't done a master's in gender, like at LSE, like, and so for that reason, like, this is all like quite a really big learning experience for me in terms of how I communicate them, but also like how I set my boundaries in terms of the ethics of it too. What was I going to say? And I've learned to be more assertive in terms of like what I think is like right for me to do, and then I've learned how to kind of convey that to people who are senior to me. There's also like with doing podcasting through a media company is the kind of difficult issue of selling your rights as well, selling your IP. And for me, I've gained a lot through doing that. I feel protected in terms of like legality, and it also means that when like buyers or investors, if they want to commission the project, then they like that legal side is sorted. I don't have to think about that or worry about it, because they're kind of bound to not sharing that information with other companies. So I kind of don't have to worry about that. But yeah, so overall, I'm having a really super enriching experience. There are, those downfalls that I mentioned, but again, they fit with my needs, as someone who is working full-time elsewhere. And yeah, it's really interesting to kind of learn about working creatively, basically. And it all stemmed back from just talking about my dissertation.
Thank you. That's really great. Yeah, that sounds really interesting and just like such an exciting podcast. And I honestly can't wait for it to be ready so that I can listen to all of it.
Oh, thank you.
Oumou, I'm just going to give it over to you. Do you want to share a little bit about your project as well?
Yeah, definitely. So I, sorry, can everyone hear me properly? I just had dodgy internet, so do let me know if you can't hear. Thanks. So similar to Kim, my project kind of came out of uni as well, and also from just sort of talking about my dissertation that I did at uni. So I was on the MSc in gender at LSE, and I graduated in 2019. So I was in Clara's year, but also in Kim's, so we crossed over. And basically for my dissertation, I went to this archive called the Olive Morris Collection, which is based in Lambeth. And I kind of wanted to write about a alternative narrative of Black history. So I kind of felt that at uni, all the kind of narratives that we're presented with about Blackness are basically to do with suffering. And I was like, that's just not real. It doesn't make any sense and it doesn't relate to me. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go out, I'm going to find something that actually feels more real. So I went to the Olive Morris Collection to learn about this activist called Olive Morris. She was alive in like the 60s and 70s in Brixton. And basically what I found in this kind of archive is that there was this group called the Remembering Olive Collective, and they spent maybe a year interviewing people and documenting and taking oral histories to do with Olive's life. So in this archive, it's basically built out of audio files already, which I'm thinking, oh, that's like such a waste. It's just sitting here really dormant. But at the time, obviously, when you're working with a dissertation, it's not something that's kind of in a creative medium, like a sort of living medium. So what I did was I kind of used the oral histories, but I used transcripts from the oral histories to kind of tell a story about Olive Morris based on these histories. And I found that the way that people's memory work is that they kind of don't remember things differently, or they don't remember things in the same way. They tell stories that may not even have happened. They tell stories that conflict with other people's stories in the archive. And so my aim in kind of presenting these stories was to try to say that like, there's no one way of being Black. There's no one way of remembering Black history. There's kind of conflicting accounts, but it kind of enables us to generate an image of Blackness that is more meaningful and can move across different spaces in a kind of creative way. And as I did that, I kind of wrote about like my own experience in the archive, and I incorporated that in my dissertation. And I used a technique called autoethnography to like analyze my own, I guess, diary entries of like learning about Olive Morris and learning in the archive. And I used that to kind of create a narrative to say it revalued her, but it also revalued me along the way. And yeah, so that was my dissertation project. And I guess I was pretty soon after I finished my dissertation, I started working on making that into an article, and I took it to the Feminist Review, and I waited for like so long to get it into a sort of state that I could submit to them. And I submitted to them and they accepted it, and then I had to rewrite it and they accepted it, but they had asked me to revise it. So I probably submitted it a year ago to the Feminist Review, and I've just submitted my final draft to them like maybe last week that's going to be published. But along the way of doing that, me and Clara had this podcast. So I guess Clara's explained what the podcast is kind of about already. But we did one episode where we talked about my project, and based on speaking about that project and having that in a podcast, my friend makes another podcast and she makes a podcast for Vice. And so she invited me onto her podcast to talk about archives, to talk about this kind of thing. So I was kind of based on that already began speaking in a sphere, in the kind of audio sphere about this kind of thing. At the same time, I was trying to use the transcripts from the Olive Morris archive to turn into a treatment for a radio production show. For a radio production. So I used the transcripts and I made them into a treatment, and I took it to this company called Falling Tree, and they work with like people like Radio 4. And they took that to Radio 4 to wait and see if they wanted to commission it. And they didn't want to commission it. So that didn't work out. Then I applied for this thing called Multitrack, which was like an audio trainee kind of thing, where they were training people in how to make podcasts. And I took them the idea and I kind of did an interview for that, but they didn't want to commission it either. So I think then I saw this ad on Instagram that was called like ICA New Creatives. And they were basically looking for people to submit like short ideas for audio or video or interactive medium kind of art, basically, and stories and narratives. And I submitted like a project called Olive Morris Voices of the Archive. And it was basically a thing that I wanted to do that would kind of weave together different excerpts from the archival oral histories to tell a story kind of similarly like to my dissertation about Olive Morris. And I applied for that in October and I didn't hear anything. So I hadn't really gotten that far, I guess, along the road of turning it into a podcast. You know, it's just like knocking on a lot of doors basically and getting turned away. But then this month they finally got back to me and were like, yeah, we'd love to commission your project. We've got this budget for you. They've given me a mentor. So I have a mentor that I'm working with to basically turn this into a thing. But it's kind of like I'm producing it and kind of in charge of managing the people and like getting it happening and doing the research. So it's been a really fun experience. I'm still kind of doing it, so I don't know if I could evaluate how it's gone yet, but it's good. It's hard. It's a shorter project, so perhaps not as I don't know, demanding as Kim's, but it's been very intense because I have quite a short turnaround. I have to finish it by June the 21st, so it's just been like an intense amount of research and stuff. But it's really fun, and I have a treatment for it. If anyone wants to know how to put together a treatment or anything, I can share a treatment somewhere, or afterwards maybe Clara can share it. Yeah, so that's basically it, to be honest, and that's where I'm at now. So hopefully there's something useful in there.
Thank you. Yeah, Mali also asked in the chat if you guys would maybe share your successful proposals and treatments later. And if you want to do that, you can just send them to me and then I can pass them on to people who are interested.
Yeah, sure.
Great. Thank you both for sharing that. Are there any questions yet from everyone else? Okay, Liza just asked, what are the key changes between what you did for your thesis as a marked piece of work with the requirements by LSE and what is important for podcasts or other formats? Whoever wants to go, just go.
Do you want me to have a go? I don't know, for mine, it wasn't too different, because I was already using the audio files. Obviously, I think for the proposal, for my dissertation, I used just more like short quotes, and for the proposal, I filled them in a bit more. Thing is that it's actually a lot more constricting writing the dissertation and conforming to the academic standards, because obviously oral histories aren't traditionally like academic narrative. So it was harder to try and conform those into an academic narrative than it is to just have a little bit more freedom and let people speak and I think I might have frozen.
Mhm.
Did I freeze? Oh, so yeah, I found it a lot more just creative, making it into a podcast, to be honest.
I think for me, writing it as a dissertation, it was like, I was so used to it because I had been doing the course for 2 years, and I really enjoyed getting to that point of like learning academic writing. Yeah, especially like at that kind of standard as well. So I had to really push myself to that. And then when I wrote the actual proposal, which was quite extensive, the kind of critique I got back was, it was just like, this is just far too academic. The way you sound is just like, and for me, I was like, what? Like I thought I simplified it, and I was even like a bit proud of myself for being able to kind of translate it into what I thought was more accessible language. And I really wanted to do that because I want to kind of, I don't want to just make it just for English speaking audience. And the company itself is also like, it's more of a global one. And so if it was to be transcribed, it just doesn't, I need to work harder at making it more accessible in that way in terms of language. So that was difficult, and I'm still working on it. I still kind of get told like, when you write it like that, it's just too academic. So yeah, because it's difficult when like the majority of what I'm learning and kind of talking about is psychoanalytic as well. But yeah, it's just kind of the work I have to do. In terms of like important for like podcasts and other formats, then I would kind of emphasize that, like transitioning from the way we kind of do our dissertation, and it's quite like dense and like quite intense, the way it sounds, and I don't want to give off kind of that like, I don't want to make it difficult kind of thing. And also the whole premise of the project itself, like for my project, was that I wanted to like make these very important, very life-changing knowledge into something that's digestible for lay people. So yeah, there's that.
Yeah, I feel like I had a similar experience in terms of like just stripping it back and not putting in so much information, because you spend so long at uni just like thinking about things that it can be kind of just like a convoluted way that no one else is really that interested in. So it came a lot of just sort of stripping it back and not overdoing it. Like you can see the treatment I probably wrote, like there's probably 300 words there. You just really need to keep it simple and just get the basic idea across.
Just Liza was just asking about that. Was it really hard to strip it back? Yeah, right. Yeah.
It just still is. It just still is. But that's I don't know. It's a skill that I really want to learn, because when I first joined the masters, I was getting a lot of kind of like, told that. I felt a little bit defensive, because I was like I was given access to like high quality teaching that others don't get to have, and so yeah, I mean that was like the inspiration of the podcast as well, is because like the theories that we're learning from and like the teaching that we get is just like for me it was healing for me, and I want to make that accessible for others.
And Mali was also asking if you can talk more about the actual process of the stripping back, like how did you go about it?
just rewriting it until it like conforms to the simplest sentences. It's also probably quite helpful to get someone else to read it, or to try and explain the basic idea to someone like out loud. That kind of just helps summarize it. Like putting it on paper, it's can be quite hard to just actually, what is the key point here? So just speaking it to someone and telling someone what it is, you can kind of summarize it in like 30 seconds, and then that's all you need, really.
Yeah, I agree. I think like taking it to like a bunch of people from like different backgrounds, like, and then hearing if they registered it, and like explicitly asking, does that make sense to you? Does that seem engaging to you? Is this is any like, is the language safe as well, like and things like that. Like, do you like kind of directly addressing like any difficulties with like how, if because sometimes I just won't realize that I've like waffled into like the area of like using like psychological terms that just don't make sense, and yeah, so just being kind of quite willing to like hear quite frankly how like not like non-communicative you sound.
Yeah, I think it's also sometimes like, you know, it's like really hard to write an abstract for something because there's just so much that needs to go into like 150 words. I think it's quite similar to that, of like just, you know, getting really to the gist of it. There's another question from Madeline. How do you deal with the ethics of interviewing someone for a podcast? I was thinking about doing a podcast as the research for my dissertation, but I was conflicted about asking for the emotional labor of the participants without them receiving payment.
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's so tough. Luckily with the archive, the interviews are already recorded. So what I've had to do is just get licensing permission from the archive to use them, which does incur a fee. And the fee is normally like, the fee, they've given me a reduced amount because it's like a small project and part of a mentorship program, but it's like £10 per minute of audio used. So whereas it could normally it might be like £50 per minute of audio used. So depending on where you're using it, it depends on how much. Yeah, it's quite a lot of money. Depends on how much they might try and charge you. But I couldn't say about interviews. When me and Clara have done our podcast, we didn't pay anyone. So.
Yeah, I think, I mean, for us, we interviewed like quite a bunch of people, and some of them twice even, but because we didn't make any money off of it, there was no like ads or anything. We made no money from it. It was all just sort of us doing it for fun. And I mean, the whole idea of the project was to sort of like, so all the stuff we spoke about was like quite niche. So it was like people who did research into like quite a niche topic. And we wanted them to like have a platform to share that, but we also wanted to like, for that research to like go like seen and heard by people. So I think that was just the idea of it. But it also, I would say, it probably wasn't a lot of work for the people that we interviewed. So like I obviously did all of the like prepping and cutting and stuff. So it was, and because it was quite low-key and because it was the stuff that they knew about anyway, I don't think it required a lot of prep on their side. And then it was usually like half an hour of a conversation. So I think, yeah, we always gave them like snacks and a drink. So, but I think that's just, yeah, I mean, decency. But yeah, I don't know. I think I get the question, especially with research. I think it's really, really difficult to deal with that. But I think it's also, it can also be unethical to pay people to participate, because then there's sort of like a element of sort of dependency. So that's also, it's difficult. I don't know. What do other people think? Everyone else, please feel free to join in into the discussion. But I don't know, Kim, do you have any thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts, because yeah, it's kind of like an ongoing like grappling with it, to be honest. I will be interviewing at least one guest per episode, so yeah, that's something for me to really kind of sit with as well and think through. And fortunately, I have mentors who will guide me on it as well, and kind of share the kind of accountability with me. So I recognize that, but I am the one who is approaching people to talk about emotions and feelings, and especially feelings that around themes of marginalization, invisibility, being misrepresented. So yeah, because of my role as a psychotherapist in training, I do a lot of disclosure. I begin with the interview guest saying, you know, that difficult emotions are going to get stirred up, and that it's a spectrum of emotions. You know, I'm not looking to kind of just draw on, you know, pain, for example. We also want to think about joy. We want to think about connection. We want to think about intimacy. We want to think about yeah, you know. So it's a range, and so in that way, I kind of in doing that, I'm trying to show that the intention is to not be exploitative of difficult emotions. But yeah, so I did that with one interview guest, and then she responded saying, I consent. So yeah, that helps. But yeah, I didn't pay an interview guest who currently works for the BBC as a journalist, and she covers, you know, a lot on disability and representation. But yeah, it's because beforehand there was a lot of explanation around the intention of the project, and I drew a lot of attention around what I think the purpose is, and the kind of like the greater meaning of it, and where kind of I hope for it to be meaningful for audiences around the world, basically. So yeah, I think I didn't kind of really think about, you know, the fact that I'm not paying her, but so it's because it was proposed to her, and I see it as like, well, she can choose to do it or not, and she's aware that there's no payment for it. So yeah, it's up to her. I mean, I can't really dwell over that.
I feel like it depends as well on your like position, and if you're like, it's not like you're a big organization with lots of money, you know. If you're coming from a marginalized position, talking about marginalized things, or or platforming other marginalized people, it's a bit different to, as opposed to coming from like a position where you're just, you know, solely exploiting. So yeah, it's complicated, but I wouldn't feel like guilty if you haven't got the funding to do it. You just have to be honest about it, and let people make their own decisions, maybe.
I agree. Yeah, it's the honesty that's there. Be transparent about it. And again, like if your content is like around mine's categorized as educational, rather than entertainment. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I think once we have the funds, maybe one day we will pay people for it, right? So it's like always depends on your position and everything, I guess. Yeah, Molly just said that's the dream. Definitely. Are there any more questions from anyone? Molly has a technical question. How do you make a podcast?
I don't know.
Well, there's different software, so you can record it on your phone. Basically, you don't need a microphone, but you can get a microphone. But then sometimes, so if you use a microphone, you need multiple microphones, so each person has one. Otherwise, the sound is going to be weird, and then you need an interface to put both the microphones in, and then that goes into your computer to record. So there's like, you need a couple of like hardware things, and then you need software to edit it. And there's free software out there, but there's also obviously like Adobe software and stuff like that. Both work well, I would say. And then you record, and then you cut, and then you publish, basically. So that's just the quick rundown of how do you make a podcast.
There's a good
want to add anything?
software, yeah, that we used, Audacity, which is like entry kind of, I guess, basic one. If you are into like music-y making stuff, there's Logic, which is probably a bit better. You can do probably more better technical things with it, which is just another computer software. But on the podcast I spoke on a few times with Vice, they just asked us to record it into our iPhones. So you don't necessarily, if you don't have the funding to get a microphone or something, you can just use your iPhone and set the voice memos onto high audio quality, like set it to limitless or something. And it doesn't sound bad at all, really. It's like good enough quality. Me and Clara have actually recorded straight onto our iPhone before, and it's worked out.
Yeah.
Okay.
We had microphones, and then we realized they were actually worse than just recording on our phones. So we switched. Yeah, Shell just also said in the chat that there are some apps for recording remotely as well, which obviously is great. And yeah, Adobe Audition is really good. I use that as well, but only because I get it from the uni for free. So. But yeah, that's expensive, obviously. Shell also asked a question: what do you think is the most difficult or vexing part of podcasting?
Most difficult and vexing part. Having lots of information and not knowing what to do with it. Trying to communicate a narrative. I think I'm finding that the hardest part is trying to make it into a narrative that makes sense and gets across what the image is. It's a bit of like a minefield. It's like very hard to think about in your head.
I think for me, it's you're gonna bring it back to the technical part. If you've done a whole kind of, if you're doing it independently, like if you're doing it, so I did a lot of I did a trailer and I did a teaser at home, and yeah, it got sent back with just like, this is unusable, because there's just kind of like sounds left, right and center that like only dogs can hear, but they can hear it. And like, so I was instructed to try and record from my wardrobe, or under the duvets, to kind of like deal with the like background noise. It just picks it up. And yeah, so if you've done a whole thing and you've done a whole day of recording and it's unusable, then it can feel really like frustrating. So yeah, like having to redo it is annoying, and also like it's quite, if you're unhappy with the like final cut in the end, it's just really frustrating because of the cost of time. And like if you're hiring an editor, for example, yeah, then like it's kind of double the cost. To bring it back to, yeah, how do you actually produce a podcast as well? So if you are looking to do it, I bought a microphone for I think £120. It's called a Blue Yeti. It looks like this, and you literally just plug it in, and then you just YouTube the instructions on how to kind of do it. But you can have it someone being interviewed with you, so it will pick up noise from like both ends. like all around. And yeah, it might take like maybe a few tutorials to kind of get the hang of it and get the nicest sound, but it is really silky. It like it is cool, and you can just use it for your just like regular calls anyway. And on another note, you can if you're doing remote interviewing, then you can use Zoom, and you can just record the sound and the interview through Zoom, like through Zoom calls as well. And yeah, you can plug in that microphone to get like the sound quality on your end as well. And maybe sometimes we may have to like mail an interview guest their own microphone. I think you can just buy one for £20 from like Amazon, unfortunately, but yeah. Yeah, and then I use Audacity to just record it as well. It's really easy, it's very straightforward for me. Anything more than that, I just will avoid it, because I can't, it doesn't compute for me. Yeah, and there's a lot of programs that you can just, I think you can just Google it, but you have like a free trial on like, yeah, or for recording, and it'll be like a month long. So if you're doing like, yeah, for example, the question on doing podcasting for your dissertation, yeah, if that project is looking to last around a month, then that's quite ideal to like do those free trials.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? I've got a question. What was it like for you, or like how does it feel to like sort of put your voice out there, in first of all in like the way of like your literal voice, but then also like your voice as in like your opinions and your thoughts, and sort of like creating the representation for yourself?
Sorry, can you repeat the start of that? I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, sure. I just asked what it feels like to put your voice out there, as in like your literal and your metaphorical voice. Or like what were worries that you had about that maybe? Or, yeah.
Yeah, it is a little bit scary. And it's easy to get caught up in thinking like, oh God, but are they going to get what I'm trying to say? Like, do they not understand me? Like, so that is a little bit scary. But I don't know, I think it's actually, people are much more, you know, open and interested in what everyone has to say than you think. So, you know, and as soon as if you share those ideas with people and you get feedback and you're like, yeah, that sounds great. Like I might have been worrying about something for so long, like, oh, does this make sense? And then I share it with someone else and they're just like, yeah, that makes complete sense. Like, and so I think it's best not to get too stuck into your head, and just sort of, the sooner you can vocalize, you know, your thoughts about it, the more you realize like, yes, my voice is fine and valid and interesting, and I have something interesting to say.
I think because I got a lot of the validation from getting the grant, and like being constantly asked to meet deadlines. It's kind of like quite obvious that, you know, that my ideas are wanted. Sometimes I kind of need to just say it in terms of that, like, you know, my views are wanted. They're literally being asked for. So yeah, and I don't have shame around kind of thinking that, because like, you know, I've been complaining that I'm so invisible. I feel so unheard. I'm not represented. I don't see myself. You know, and because my work revolves around, you know, thinking about how representation, misrepresentation, and no representation lacks like forms your sense of self and your self-esteem. For that reason, I just, you know, feel just so righteous about just speaking and giving that kind of space to others. And so when I interview guests, again, like as part of the kind of disclosure, I will also say like my role is to just listen. So yeah, and so sometimes you kind of just have to practice what you preach as well. You know, that you deserve to be listened to, and so I have been like met with views that conflict with mine, or like I've been told like, you know, what you're doing is too vague, for example. And you know, I've kind of worked with someone who's quite difficult, and doesn't really like kind of wasn't the most kind of enthusiastic about my project, or my approach, but I think being able to kind of get support with that, talk about why that kind of hurts a bit, and yeah, like just don't do things alone, like again, because it's vulnerable work to like put yourself out there and speak and literally have your voice recorded, and it's about things that you know, like inherently you're saying that your views matter, which is a vulnerable thing to do. Yeah, just don't do it alone. Yeah, just constantly keep sharing like with others what you're doing, and it's a way to remind yourself like yeah, that you deserve to, basically.
Thank you. That was really nicely said. Are there any other questions? Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
I was just thinking about that in terms of interviewing and interview skills, and how to get people to say, like, not get people, how to help people speak, I guess, and share their own things. Like I've done a tiny bit of training when I wrote an article. They sent us for some training in complicating the narrative and how to sort of understand people's motivations, as opposed to just like getting a very surface level responses. And probably the most useful thing I learned from that is when someone is finished speaking, to repeat back to them what they've said and then ask if that's right. So I don't know, say Clara's talking about going to the shops. I'm like, so you're telling me, like, summarize in a few words, like, that this is what you're kind of feeling and this made this, is that right? And then they'll either say no and they'll correct you, so you get to the real point, or they'll say yes and they might add on to it, so you get into like a deeper kind of conversation that way. And you kind of can keep doing that until until you run out or decide to sort of naturally move on to the other question. But I think, and from that as well, the most important thing is to listen and not worry too much about your questions, because if you're listening, you can sort of pick up easier on what they're saying. But if you're trying to remember your questions, then you might just limit the conversation in a way.
Yeah, I agree. Oumou, we went to that interview training thing once. Do you remember? Do you not remember that?
Oh, I can't remember. I don't know, because my brain is a bit fried right now. But maybe
it's like in King's Cross.
Oh yeah, we did. Sorry, yes, we did. I do remember that.
And yeah, the person who did it, he was also like sort of explaining how it's like, yeah, like if you have a set of questions, that's just gonna make you like a really rigid interviewer, and you're not gonna actually like get the best story out of it if you don't like follow what the person's telling you. So I think that's really good like interview advice, which we only got, I think, a couple of weeks before COVID hit and we actually stopped doing the podcast. But yeah, that was good advice. Are there any other things that you two want to say, or any other questions that anyone has? maybe, do you two want to say like any last words? Any like, enjoy your lunch, Molly? Any other like sort of like pieces of advice or anything that you want to give anyone?
Go on, give us your best advice. Give us your like parting words of wisdom.
I'm not sure, probably the interview thing, that's been the most useful thing to me, because I sometimes write articles as well, so for interviewing people, looping them, repeating back to them what they've said has been the most useful thing ever in terms of getting good like conversation going and good answers going.
I think like it's one I'm still kind of like battling with, but I'm gonna have to accept that like my first few recordings are like ones that I may cringe at later on, because you know it's just you do just become better. You do become more and more of a better practiced at something, and you know you're just gonna have to deal with that as well. But I would say that I used to hate hearing like how I sounded played back to me a lot, and so I thought the idea of recording myself would be mortifying. But now, actually, not like when you do it and you kind of like everyone's reaction is not like, "Ew, you sound disgusting," and like you kind of hear that actually, yeah, you know, you do sound quite good. Yeah, you do just get used to it, and now I'm at that point now because of doing it again and again. I don't care how I sound. Yeah. So yeah, you will reach that point, and yeah, just keep going.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're almost at 3 o'clock anyway, so maybe this is a good point to just end for today. Thank you everyone for your input and your questions, and thank you Kim and Oumou for joining and sharing all of your stories and advice and perspectives. Yeah.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone, and see you next time, hopefully.
Thank you, Clara.